Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is the last topic of the day, so thank you very much for joining. My name is Anna McCollum. I'm with the product management team for the Enterprise and Cloud Manageability Division at Oracle. And for today's session, we are going to talk about quick start essentials for Oracle Management Cloud Infrastructure Monitoring. So this session was initially designed for folks who are new to Oracle Management Cloud and Infrastructure Monitoring Service specifically. In this session, if you are new to our service, you'll quickly learn how to quickly set up monitoring for your environment. And if you're already familiar with some of our features, hopefully you'll be able to learn about perhaps other features that you haven't yet used and could leverage in your environment. Okay, so let's get started. Oracle Management Cloud, or we call OMC for short, is an integrated suite of cloud services composed of application performance monitoring, log analytics, IT analytics, and infrastructure monitoring. They are collectively built upon a unified data platform powered by machine learning and designed to offer monitoring and analytics capabilities for your applications as well as your application infrastructure running on premises or on the cloud. In today's session, we will discuss Infrastructure Monitoring Service, which focuses on monitoring your application infrastructure stack, your hosts, your databases, your app servers that could be running on premises or on cloud. This is a high-level topology and overview of how the functionality works. So at the top here, we see infrastructure monitoring that is part of OMC in the cloud. And the goal of infrastructure monitoring is to provide monitoring visibility across your entire estate. At the bottom here, we have your on-premises infrastructure. This is where you have your hosts, your databases, your app servers, etc. And to monitor these, you would deploy a cloud agent on your host servers. And this cloud agent would be used to monitor the host itself, as well as the app servers, databases, etc. that are running on the host. Collectively, we call this an OMC monitored entities or just entities. An agent can monitor the entities that are running on that machine on which you deployed it on, or it could be also used to monitor entities that are running remotely, right, on another machine. All the data that the cloud agent collects can be uploaded directly over the internet to OMC. However, some customers prefer to control the host that have internet access and prefer to designate only a few machines to have internet access. In this scenario, you would deploy a gateway agent, which is a special type of agent, and its job is to serve as a channel between the cloud agents and OMC, right? And so you deploy the gateway agent on a host that has internet access, and then the agents would send their data to the gateway, and the gateway would send the data to OMC. We also have integration with other system management tools and collectors such as Telegraph, Collectd, VMware vCenter, and Microsoft SCOM. These tools are able to monitor a broad set of heterogeneous types. And so with the integration with these tools, we expand the types of infrastructure that you can monitor in OMC. And for other types of infrastructure, you can also create your own custom scripts that collect the data that you want and also upload that to OMC via REST APIs. So for cloud services, we discover and collect data for the cloud services using REST APIs, and all of these are also sent to OMC. In OMC, once the data is collected, discovery occurs for all your entities, then you can monitor these using our home pages and dashboards. You can create alert rules which evaluate the metrics against thresholds you specify, and if they cross the thresholds, alerts are triggered. You can configure the alert notifications to be sent over email or tickets. And finally, we have a machine learning capabilities that really try to understand the baseline behavior, right? So baselines are basically the expected range of performance metric values for key performance metrics for your entities. And once we learn what the expected baseline behavior is for our particular entity, when we receive a new metric data point, we evaluate that against the expected baseline. And if it's outside it, we flag that as potentially anomalous, and we show that in the performance charts. Okay, so let's get started and talk about how to actually set up monitoring. Before you do so, first question to ask, well, what type of monitoring do you need? Typically, users start with basic monitoring, and what this means is you might start off with one environment, for example, your test environment, and you might want to use the same monitoring standard across all entities in this environment. Later on, as you've monitored this environment and want to expand that to other environments, perhaps your production environment, then this gets into a little bit more advanced monitoring, in which case you might want to set up different monitoring standards for your production environment. Okay, so let's start with the basic monitoring. Okay, so here, let's say you want to set it up in your test environment or a particular project. In here, your environment might be such that all entities of the same type have the same monitoring settings. For example, you might want to monitor the same set of metrics and use the same thresholds against all your host servers. The alert notifications go to the same recipients, perhaps over email, and you want monitoring to be enabled upon discovery. To set up this type of monitoring, there are 3 steps: setting up the license, adding the entities or discovering them in OMC, and then creating your alert rules. So let's talk about the first step. First step is about setting up the license. So a license is how you control the entities that you want to monitor, okay? So monitoring only happens on a discovered entity only if you've enabled the license on that entity. So for infrastructure monitoring, we have 2 types of licenses. We have standard edition license and we have enterprise edition, right? So standard is the basic monitoring, and then enterprise basically has all of the functionality in standard, except you get to keep the data for a longer period of time because you also can do analytics on top of the data. So that's really the difference, okay? So from a monitoring perspective, think about it, right? You discover the entity for monitoring, and then you have to think about the license, right? So that flow is a little bit, maybe disruptive to the monitoring flow per se. However, you do want the license set. So to make the flow more streamlined, what we have is a feature called license auto assignment. And using the license auto assignment feature, you can set the value to either standard edition or enterprise edition. What this means is if you set the license auto assignment value, then once you add the entity for monitoring, it will automatically set the license to whatever value you set. Let's say you set it to standard, right? And once it's automatically set, then monitoring can start automatically, right? So this definitely streamlines the monitoring setup for you. Okay, next, let's start monitoring entities. Typically, customers start with monitoring the host. Now, to monitor the host, you simply need to install the cloud agent on that host. Once you install the cloud agent, the host on which you've installed that cloud agent is automatically discovered and monitoring starts. Once monitoring is started, you can go to the console and you can monitor the status and performance of that host in its homepage. This is a screenshot example of the homepage for a host. Here we show the status of current availability status on the upper left corner. If you had created alert rules, which I'll talk about in a second, for that, then we show any open alerts. Here are the key performance metrics, here are the performance charts. You can customize a homepage by choosing the metrics to show in this chart view. You can look at different periods of time, et cetera, et cetera. As part of monitoring the host and any other type of entity, we monitor the availability status. Once we detect that, or if we detect that entity is down, we automatically generate a entity down alert. Now, for the host specifically, the way that we monitor the availability status of a host is using the agent that is installed on the host. So what the agent does, it sends regular pings. You can think of it as heartbeat pings to OMC, basically to indicate that it's alive, right? And so if we receive the agent pings, we know the agent is up, the host that it's on is up, everything is good. Now, if we haven't heard from the agent for some period of time, few minutes, typically around 5 minutes, then we generate automatically a not heard from alert on that host as well as the agent. And this could be an indication that the agent and or its host are possibly down. And so if you see these types of alerts, then go ahead and start, investigating these. Now, let me talk about how to install the Cloud Agent, right? So to install the Cloud Agent, the first thing you need to do is go to the OMC console. And here you would choose the operating system for that particular host. And then here, I have a screenshot, is where you would download the agent binary. When you download the agent binary, take a note of these two parameters, the tenant name and OMC URL. We put that as part of the agent download because we do want you to take a note of it because it will be used as part of the agent installation. The next thing that you do, and again, it's still in the console, is create a registration key for that agent and download that as well to your destination machine. This key is used to authenticate the agent and tell OMC that this is a valid agent. Okay, the next step is on that destination host machine, take that agent file, which is actually a zip file, unzip that file, and then look for a file called agent.rsp. What this file is a file that serves as input, that contains the input parameters for the agent installation. Now, there are different parameters in that file, but really the most critical ones is what I show here. The tenant name, which the value again is from that agent download UI, the agent registration key, which you've created on step 2. Base directory is a the directory in which you want the agent to be installed, and then the OMC URL, again, from that agent download UI, okay? Once you've done that, go ahead and start running the installation script. After a few minutes, you should be able to see that the agent is up and running. You could re-verify it by using the OMCLI, which is the agent's command line utility, and do an OMCLI status agent, verify it's running, okay? And then for more information, I have the link to the documentation for installing the agent. Okay, so a few notes about the agent deployment. As I mentioned earlier, agents can communicate directly to OMC over the internet. However, if you do prefer not to have all of your hosts have internet access and communicate directly to OMC, you can choose the option of using a gateway. If you recall, a gateway is a special type of agent that serves as a channel between your agents and OMC. If you do want to use the gateway route, make sure it's on a host that does have internet access. And if you plan to use the gateway, right, think about that earlier on, because you do need to install the gateway first before installing your cloud agents. And then the gateway install is very similar to the agent installation, which we talked about earlier. Okay, so now you've installed possibly a gateway and also your cloud agents. Let's now talk about adding other entity types, databases, app servers, etc., for monitoring. This is the general workflow. First is consult our documentation using Oracle Infrastructure Monitoring. And the reason you would consult that is there might be some prerequisite steps that you might need to do first before adding that particular entity. For example, you might need to create monitoring credentials, right? So based on the entity type that you want to discover, check the documentation and perform any of the prereq steps. Okay, once you've done that, then you can use the Add Entity UI in the OMC console. And when you do the Add Entity, you choose the entity type, specify the parameters, which are typically information to identify that entity, monitoring credentials, typically, and also the agent that you use for monitoring. Alternatively, you can also add the entity using the agent's OMCLI utility. Now, if you use OMCLI, then the parameters and credentials that you need to provide are specified using JSON files. We have template JSON files for every entity type that you can use, and you can consult our documentation. It has a link to where you can get these template JSON files. So download that, choose the entity type you're interested in adding, fill in the parameters, and then use the agent's OMCLI utility. The OMCLI utility is very useful if you want to do the add entity using a scripted way, or if you want to add entities, many at a time in bulk. You can use OMCLI for that as well. Here's a screenshot of adding the entity in the UI. My example is an Oracle database system. Note I use the word system because really the Oracle database does not act alone, right? There are listeners, clusterware, ASM, there are PDBs, et cetera, that are part of that database system. And the way that we discover it, the database, is collectively all of the members of the system. So here's a screenshot of what it would look like if you add a database system in the UI. It'll ask you what type of config is this? Is it a rack? Is it single instance? And then based on your choice, it'll ask you for things like, well, what's the name of the rack database, scan listener, port, service name, et cetera, et cetera. It will also ask you for credentials to be used for monitoring the database. If you also have ASM, also it'll ask for ASM credentials. And then finally, there are other input parameters such as tags, right? If you want to put some operational context for these entities, go ahead and add that there using the tags. There's an option to specify the addition if you want. Again, we've already specified that, so you don't have to worry about this in this scenario. And then the last button is really for use of log analytics. So log analytics is another service that is part of OMC, and it's focused on really looking at the logs and looking for errors within the logs. Now, if you plan to use log analytics, you can do so at a later stage, right? But if you want to do it at the same time you're discovering it and you have enabled log analytics, then this button is really a quick way to enable the quick setup of log analytics for use with the Oracle database system. Again, this is optional. It's there as a convenience, but if you decide to use log analytics at a later date, you can certainly do that as well. So this is actually one UI page. I just broke it up into different sections so I can talk about it in different sections. Okay, so you've entered the parameters, you've hit OK. What happens next? The discovery job or the add entity job is submitted. It goes from submitted to in progress and finally completed. And if it's done and completed successfully, you'll see a status of completed with a green check mark. Now, as part of the discovery process, we also do some validation. We check that the monitoring credential specified is actually valid, that the agent can use for monitoring. We check that those credentials have the sufficient privileges for monitoring. And if it's lacking some privileges, we tell you upfront, right? We raise an error. We do this proactively just to ensure that not only can you discover these entities, but you can also monitor it successfully. So if there are any errors reported, please don't disregard it. Please, review the errors, fix it, and then if needed, retry the discovery, okay? So let's assume that discovery went fine, everything is good. You'll see the completed status with a green check mark. You can just simply click on that entity name. When you click on that, it'll go to the home page of the database system. And here's a screenshot. I am in the related entities tab of the homepage for the database system, just to show you the different entities that are part of the database system that we've also discovered. ASM, clusterware, cluster list, etc. Okay, so what about cloud services? How do those get discovered? For cloud services, you would use what we call a cloud discovery profile. And in the cloud discovery profile, you choose or specify the cloud service provider. You would then specify the services in the region that you're interested in discovering and monitoring, and also any necessary credentials. Once you specify this, we discover the cloud services and start collecting metrics through using REST APIs. And if new instances of that cloud service is provisioned, then on a periodic basis, those are automatically discovered and monitored. And if it's deleted, then we automatically delete the corresponding entity in OMC as well. Okay, so we talked about discovering of cloud services in a generic way. For autonomous database, this is also the way that you would discover autonomous databases in OMC. There are, prereq steps that you'll need to follow. So please consult the documentation and follow the prereq steps. And when you've completed the prereq steps, go ahead and start and add the cloud profile for the autonomous database. Next, let's talk about alert rules. We've talked about how to discover or add the entities that are running on premises or cloud services. Now let's talk about how you would create alert rules for these. Now, alert rules, there are three major parts of an alert rules. First is the entity or entities upon which the alert rule applies, your alert conditions, when do you want OMC to trigger alerts for these? All of the metric evaluation for alerting happens at the OMC side, right? So this is where you specify the conditions on which you want alerts to be triggered. And finally, the notifications. When an alert is triggered, where do we send the notifications for the alerts? So let's talk about the first section, which are the entity types. My recommendation is to specify entity types. And you can specify multiple different entity types: Oracle database, listener, host, et cetera, et cetera. When you specify entity types, this means that this rule applies to all instances of these entity types. Entities that exist now as you're creating the alert rule, entities that you'll add in the future. If you specify entity types, and you're pretty much set, right? You can go on, start discovering more and more instances of that type. And once you've done that, you already have a rule that's already preset for that particular entity type. So you don't have to retroactively, fix your alert rule. You're pretty much already set. And that's why the recommendation is to use entity types, okay? So specify the entity types first, and then specify the alert conditions for each entity type. Typically, when you first start, there are two common alert conditions that you would use: availability and fixed thresholds. Now, the availability alert condition really pertains to the entity down alerts. Now, if you recall, I did say that by default, for any type of entity that we monitor, we automatically generate a entity down alert if we detect that entity is down. So then why are you adding the availability alert condition? The reason is you would add it in your alert rule because this is how you indicate the notifications that should be sent if an entity down alert is triggered. So that's really the primary reason for including it in your alert rule, okay? The other common type of alert condition is fixed thresholds. For this alert condition, this is where you choose a metric, the operator, and then the thresholds. In my example here for the database, I want to have an alert triggered if the process limit utilization exceeds my thresholds of 95 and 99. And if that happens, I want an alert to be generated. Finally, the last part here is about setting up the notifications. Typically, you'd start with email. And here you can create an email channel on the fly. And in the email channel, you specify a name, specify the email addresses, or perhaps a distribution list, email distribution list for your team. The default behavior when it comes to sending email notifications for alerts is that we send a notification when the alert first triggers. When it worsens in severity, perhaps it goes from a warning severity to a critical severity, and then when it's cleared, right? So if you have one of those flapping alerts that go from, critical warning, critical warning, critical warning, right? We certainly don't want to spam people with all the emails as it flaps. And that's why deliberately we only send the email again when it worsens in severity. However, if you do have requirements that you want a notification for every severity change, you can certainly override this default behavior and change it accordingly. Okay. So that's the basic setup, right? That's a setup where you have, same monitoring for your environment, perhaps for your test environment. So fast forward, you might want to expand the monitoring to other environments, perhaps your production environment. And in this environment, you might want to deploy different monitoring standards for your production environment. And your alert notifications for production might go to different recipients. So how do you set this up? It's very similar, except we're going to use groups, right? So the first step is set the license auto assignment, as I described earlier. Then you'll use dynamic groups to represent each environment. So a group is basically a group of entities. And I use the word dynamic because the way that you want the group to be populated is based on membership criteria. You have two types of groups: static groups, where you manually add the members to the group, and then dynamic groups, where you define the membership criteria for your group. And the recommendation here is you create dynamic groups for each environment that you want to monitor, right? You might want to monitor your production environment. So you can create a group called prod group. And the membership criteria there is using the tag environment. You can say all entities with the tag environment equals production, they should go to my prod group. In a similar way, you can create a test group for your entities in the test environment, call it. And in that test group, you can say the membership criteria is all entities with the tag environment equals test, okay? So set your groups, and then create the alert rules using the group. And then the last step is when you add the entity, specify the right tags, okay? So let's walk through these steps. First is creating the dynamic groups. This is a screenshot of what the group creation UI looks like. Choose the dynamic membership criteria option and choose the criteria for adding entities to the group. My example, I say all entities that have the tag environment set to production should join the prod group, and I can do a very similar step for creating my test group, okay? Also note that the group can be heterogeneous, right? Composed of different entity types. Once you've done that, start using the group in your alert rules, right? So in your alert rule, remember the first part of the rule is specifying the entities. In this scenario, you would choose the specific entities and choose the group that you've created, prod group, right? What this means is this alert rule will apply to not only the current members of prod group, but all members that will be added dynamically to prod group in the future. And then next, specify the alert conditions for each entity type in the group. So you could have hosts and databases and app and Apache servers, et cetera, Remember to choose different alert conditions, availability, fixed thresholds, et cetera, right? So, try to think about all the different scenarios in which you want alerts to be generated and make sure that you set it up for all the different entity types in your group. And then the last section is setting up the notifications, which folks are the recipients for alerts for prod group, right? Okay, so once you've set that up, as you're adding entities for monitoring, make sure you use that last option when you're adding the entity to specify the tag. In my example here, I'm adding an Apache server. So I'm going to specify the tag environment set to production. After the discovery of the Apache server, what OMC does is it looks at the tag, it locates the prod group and automatically adds this Apache server to the prod group. And guess what? I already have my alert rule set up, right? So I'm already covered from an alert rule setup perspective, okay? So those are the typical workflow or actions that you do to discover and set up alerting. Now let's talk about common how do I questions. So my alerts are set up and my IT ops or DevOps team are now receiving email notifications for my alerts. How do I provide them quick access to the runbook instructions that will guide them through the workflow of managing the alerts? Well, you can use a field in the alert condition called note. So when you add an alert condition in your alert rule, there's a field called note. And in here, you can specify, quick instructions or your runbook URL. Once you've done this, then when they receive an email notification for that alert, we also include whatever information that you've put in that note field, right? If you put the runbook URL, it's very conveniently accessible to them. They can simply, click on that link and start, working on the alert based on whatever URL, whatever instructions you have in your runbook. If they're looking at the alert details in the OMC console, we also show the information that you specified in the note. If I have my IT ops or DevOps teams in different locations, how do I accommodate those folks? Well, you can create different email notification channels per location. As part of the email channel creation, specify the name and address or addresses. And you can also specify the language and the time zone. And if you do that, then when you receive or when the folks in that location receive the email notification for this alert, note that we automatically adjust the alert timestamp for the language and the time zone. Time zone is especially helpful because it's the timestamp is set in a time zone that they're most familiar with. Well, can I also further customize the alert message based on my standards that I use in-house? The answer is absolutely. in the alert condition, there is a section to customize the message format. Again, totally optional. You can use a default or customize. And so for customization, you can use a different language if you need to. You can add instructions, maybe format the message in a different way. Available to you as you're constructing your own message is the context of the alert, and it's available in what we call message tokens, right? So these represent the payload of the alert, the entity in which the alert was raised, the metric value, etc. So you can embed that in the message of the alert. Here's an example of what the after customization of what the alert message could look like, right? This is my attempt of translating it in Spanish, and I've also chosen to customize the language and the time zone for the notification channel. I've also included the note, right? So there's a lot of customizations that you can add with the alert conditions. So how do I remind my team of alerts that say open? You can use repeat notifications. So repeat notifications is a feature that you can use, and what it does is sends repeat email notifications to your recipients on a periodic basis on an interval that you specify, and it keeps doing this until either the maximum repeat notifications have been met or the alert clears, okay? And note that it applies specifically to email notifications. What about notifications beyond email? These are different types of notification channels that we support. Besides email, we also have a mobile app, applies to iOS and Android devices. You can certainly download and use that and receive alerts to the mobile app. You can use webhooks, which is really a very common way that you could send alerts to external systems via HTTP post. You can send Slack messages. And we also provide an integration with PagerDuty and ServiceNow if that is what you use as your corporate incident management tools. Now let's talk about using the console to manage and monitor your entities. Let's start off with the enterprise summary. So when you go to infrastructure monitoring, this is the first UI that you see, it's enterprise summary. And it's really designed to give you that overview of enterprise health and answer basic questions. Is everything up, or do I have entities that are down that I have to investigate? The entity status answers that question. If everything is green, everything is up. For those that are not green, meaning it's down or there's some other issue that's going on, you can quickly drill down and find out the entities that are down. Also looking towards the other parts of the UI, notice that we have different regions representing a different types of infrastructure, your host, your database, your web app servers, etc. The bar charts here also indicate and show you a breakdown of the availability status. So you can quickly assess, right, from this page, which entities are down. Are they my hosts? Is it the database? Is it the app servers, etc.? And you can do drill downs there. You can also answer questions like, do I have any open alerts and what are these? And so that I can further investigate, right? And this is answered by the alerts region here. You can click on any of these and drill down and investigate. You can also answer questions such as, well, are any of my servers maxed out on CPU, right? In a region, you can click on this option. You can choose any metric and say, show me all the CPU utilization across all my hosts and show me the top ones, right? So I can find out if any of them are maxed on CPU. And you can do that for any region out there, like database, app server, etc., and use any metric that is applicable for that particular entity type. So let's take a closer look at, for example, the web app servers. Like let's go through an example workflow. Which app servers are under the heaviest load, right? So drilling down on that region, I can choose to plot in the scatter plot any two metrics, so I can correlate two metrics at the same time, find out at a glance which ones are under the heaviest load, right? Measured by these web request metrics. I can easily identify, okay, I have this high data point here representing one of my app servers. If I click on that data point, I can find out when did this particular high usage perhaps of my web request rate start to occur. It shows me a graph over the recent period of time, over the last day, to show me perhaps trends. Is it something recent? Has it been trending up for a while? And if I need to further investigate, Right here, I can click on the name of that app server, which brings me to the home page where I can investigate the app server more closely, look at the other metrics. And if needed, if I want to then take a look at the host on which this app server is deployed, maybe that's under heavy load as well. So I can quickly go to the related entities tab, which shows me all the entities that are related to this host, which includes the app server. And I can identify that host, click on that host name, go to that homepage, et cetera, right? So this is an example of the type of workflows that you can follow using the console. Now, back to Enterprise Summary, we started with a big overview of all your entities. You can certainly hone in and focus on a specific subset of entities, right? Using this, what we call the global context, right? You can start entering the group, right, that you've created, your prod group, and this filters to only show the entities that are part of prod group, or you can also enter there in an application name, right? So we monitor, for example, e-business suite application. If you type in a group or an application name, then this enterprise summary automatically filters to show you the entities that are part of that group or supporting that application, right? And you can do a very similar exercise. Is everything up? Our entities are down? Which entities are down? Or do I have any open alerts? I can quickly, check on performance of any entity or component that is part of my application stack. You can also, clicking on this icon here, open our topology view. Now, topology viewer is where we show the associations or relationship between the entities. So for composites or systems, such as a database system or an e-business suite, we know that these entities have associations between them, and we automatically detect the associations between them. And the topology viewer is a way to visualize that. If you're monitoring any custom application in OMC and you have knowledge of the associations between your components, and you can certainly also enrich a topology and add the associations yourself, right? So once the associations are there, you can certainly leverage that for troubleshooting purposes, right? Here we see a graph or topology viewer of all the entities and associations between them. Anything that is colored not green, that implies that there's some availability issue that is happening. So you can quickly identify which entities are down. And then, for example, using the associations, you can quickly troubleshoot. Well, this entity is dependent on this other entity, right? So maybe I should investigate that dependent entity first and see what's going on there, right? And hopefully once I clear that up, then the entities that rely on it will also, have its availability status restored. Okay, moving on. So the other functionality that you can leverage in the UI is the anomalies. If you recall, automatically we have machine learning capabilities that try to look at all of the metric data that it receives. Then over a period of time, it tries to assess what is the expected baseline behavior for these key performance metrics for this entity. And baseline is simply the expected range of values for that particular metric for that particular entity, right? So it observes the metric data values and tries to find out, okay, so this is expected range of values for this particular key metric for this particular entity. So once it's established the expected baseline behavior, as we receive more metrics for that particular entity, it evaluates and sees if that metric value is outside the baseline, the expected baseline. And if it is, then we automatically flag that. This is what that, the yellow dots are showing in your performance charts. And then we flag that as potentially anomalous. So go ahead and take a look at that because it could mean possibly a performance issue. In your alert rules, you also have the option, if you want, to create an alert or trigger an alert based on anomalies. And if you choose to do that, it also, under the covers, enables the tracking of seasonality in the machine learning engine. What specifically that means is it tries to see if there's any daily seasonality with the metric values, and daily seasonality means that there's an expected range of values for a metric within each hour of the day. Perhaps the workload is such that, if it's busy at the first hour of the day, 9 to 10, and then later on in the evening, 5 to 6, 6 to 7 p.m., then the range of values is lower, right? Because people start, logging off. Or is there any weekly seasonality, right? An example here is perhaps Monday from 9 to 10, load is expected to be higher because that's when people start using the system. And then towards the end of the week, Friday from 9 to 10, right? People stop, tapering off, the usage starts tapering off, and then the expected range of values is lower, right? So then it starts to see if there's any seasonality within the data that it is receiving, okay? Now, the other questions that we typically hear from is like, okay, great, I've set up monitoring, but there might be other entity types that is not provided, quote unquote, out of box, or there might be any other alert conditions that I want to monitor that's not covered by the built-in metrics. So how do I monitor those entities or those conditions? Well, the answer is our monitoring is extensible, and we have different features to support these use cases. Let's start off with process monitoring. With process monitoring, this gives you the ability to monitor any process that's running on a host. So what you do is you identify the process. You can say, hey, I want you to monitor this process, and the process name has this type of pattern, right? So once you've identified that, then we start monitoring that process and let you know the state of that process, and also the CPU and memory usage. So you can create an alert rule, for example, hey, let me know when this process CPU is greater than 90, right? Trigger an alert. Or you can create an alert rule, hey, when this process is not running anymore, right? I also want an alert, right? You can create those types of alert rules. What about adding my own metrics? So we support that by custom metrics, and there are two flavors of custom metrics. The first flavor is an agent-based custom metric. What this means is these are custom metrics that you can add to entities that are monitored by the agent. For example, the Oracle database is monitored by the agent. So if you want to add a new database metric, right, to the set of what we already monitor, what you can do is simply specify your SQL query, register that with the agent, specify how often, the collection frequency, etc. And what happens is after you've done that, the agent starts collecting the metric data using your own custom scripts, and these metric data starts getting uploaded to OMC. The other flavor of custom metrics is API-based. In this scenario, this applies for entity types that are not monitored by a cloud agent. Nevertheless, you can create custom scripts to monitor these particular metric values and upload these and send these as new metrics to OMC using REST APIs, right? So once you've sent the metric data to OMC, at that point, these new metrics start appearing on your homepage. Again, OMC doesn't really care how the metric value got there. It's just there. We show it in the home pages. In your dashboards, you can create alert rules. You can say, hey, when this metric value crosses this threshold, generate an alert, send a notification. All of those monitoring capabilities automatically apply to your custom metrics as well. If you want to monitor new entity types and metrics, you can certainly define these using REST APIs as well. And then finally, we also have the special integration with collectD and Telegraph. So collectD and Telegraph, these are special collectors that can collect a broad set of infrastructure types. And with this integration with collectD and Telegraph, do a one-time connection between these collectors and our agent. Once you've done that, you can configure collectD's or Telegraph's read or input plugins to collect different types of entity types. And once they're able to collect that, all that data seamlessly goes from the collectD daemon to our agent, to OMC, and you can see it in their dashboards. You can create alert rules, etc. All of that monitoring functionality applies. So I covered a lot of ground here. I just wanted to give you an overview of these different extensibility features. For details, refer to our documentation. It does have all of the details to use any of these features. Finally, I did want to talk about dashboards. We talked about how you can use our out-of-box UI to monitor and use, and drill down to investigate issues. We also have dashboards. So if you have an operations center where you have these big screens that you want to monitor, you have your staff monitor, your systems, You can certainly use your dashboards. Now, the power of dashboard is also seen when you combine data across different services within the OMC suite. So for example, you could use log analytics, collect the log data there, and create what we call widgets or regions that represent data from log analytics, such as error trends. Combine that with the data you get from infrastructure monitoring. So imagine you have a dashboard that shows a log data, status data, performance data, alerts data, et cetera, in that particular UI, and you therefore get richer operational insight across all your managed entities. Now, we have a lot of built-in dashboards that you can start with. We can always do a create like, customize these, change the layout, add new metrics, etc. Really tailor it to your requirements. So let me leave you with these 3 important pieces of information. One is the infrastructure monitoring master node in MOS, My Oracle Support. This is where you would go to find out which entity types are supported with the cloud agent, as well as the versions that we support for each of these entity types. Then we also have the documentation, which has descriptions of all the features that I talked about, and also our metric reference guide. We often get questions, well, which metrics do you support for this entity type, etc. The metric reference guide is where you get that information. Okay, well, I thank you for your time. Hopefully at the end of the session, you've learned how to use infrastructure monitoring and use these tips and strategies to quickly set up monitoring for your environment. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions now, if there are any. So let me look, I guess I will look at the Q&A. Okay, well, I don't have any questions yet, so I can stay on and happy to answer questions. So I'm checking. Okay, I see a question. Is it separate licensing or can we monitor from our on-prem OEM as well, please? Let's see. Okay, so it looks like you're using Enterprise Manager. And when you say monitor, so Enterprise Manager is our on-premises systems management tool. And is the question monitoring the targets that OEM already monitors, or is it using the data from Enterprise Manager and using that in our analytics capabilities? Right, so if it's the latter, I don't know if, well, you can type the follow-up or I can maybe answer it in both ways. So if EM is monitoring that target, then, you can continue to use EM. If you want OMC infrastructure monitor that target, that would, you can certainly do that as well, right? It's kind of double monitoring, but there might be reasons for you doing that. To do that, think of it as an independent, tool set, right? In that case, right? It's sufficient just to use the standard edition from OMC infrastructure monitoring to do that monitoring. Now, we do have a special integration with Enterprise Manager. Again, it comes from the same division, where we leverage a lot of the data that Enterprise Manager is already collecting for your targets, and we feed that to OMC in order to leverage the analytics capabilities, right? So in that case, you would license the Enterprise Edition in OMC, and this is where, with the Enterprise Edition, we start harvesting the data. There's a special type of agent called the data collector. What it does is it grabs the data from the repository, it uploads that to OMC, and we have IT analytics capabilities that can look at the data from that OEM site or across different OEM sites, if you have multiple, collects it over long periods of times. And then you can do a lot of, capacity planning, trending, analytics capability on top of that. And in that scenario, right, you would then license the enterprise edition of OMC, right? So there are two scenarios, but in both scenarios, it would be a separate license. One would just be for basic monitoring standard edition. And for the scenario where you want to harvest the data from OEM and use our analytic capability, you would use the enterprise edition, but those would be OMC specific licenses that you would have to use. Okay, I hope that answered that question. Any other questions?
If there are no other questions, we can finish the lecture.
Okay.
Thank you for everything, Anna.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.